had a call from a Rotarian who had been speaking to some other Rotarians and who advised me that he thought that the subject that I was speaking on was too sensitive and would I withdraw. I was quite stunned actually, and I have never felt that the way to avoid a problem is to turn your back on it. And I hope that what I have put together will be in a constructive way. That is my purpose. I would never do anything other than that. It is sort of focusing, though, on the second of the Rotary four-way test items. Is it fair to all concerned? And I'm not a lawyer or especially bright, but I'm going to be speaking on a subject that is a result of my ranch being immediately adjacent to an Indian reserve, changed a year ago to Indigenous reserve, to be politically correct. When we first came to British Columbia, we being Linda and me, in 1961, the only person in the province that we knew was my Uncle Bill, who had a ranch on a place called the Hat Creek Road near Ashcroft, British Columbia. So in going visiting him, we had to drive from the highway, he was about 5 miles off the highway. We had to drive about 5 miles in, and there was another ranch, and then there was an Indian reservation, and then his ranch. So in traveling to him over the first year or so, and visiting the only person that I knew, we had to drive through both this ranch that was a neighbor and the Indian reservation. And when the when the ranch came available for sale, I kind of fall in love with the caribou and decided that I'd try and see if we could buy it. And that was in 1963. And I hadn't had 2 beans to put together at that time. I've got 2 or 3 now, but not much more. And so I talked 5 other people into kicking up $500 each, and with a down payment of $3,000, we bought a 160-acre ranch. And we'll show that up in a second.
Yeah, events.
And my ranch, in my address here, I hope to, dealing with Julie Wilson Griglo's new book, From Where I Stand. And I don't think she needs any introduction to this group. We're talking about the hippie era, which is related to my ranch. Another Indigenous person, Calvin Helene, who was a speaker at the Provost Club, and then some thoughts on wrapping up. But in purchasing the ranch, we'll start with that. It's shown in the lower part of the crosshatch part there. The upper part was something we acquired later. And that part right in the middle is the Indian reservation. And so immediately adjacent to our ranch. And in the first day after we had acquired the ranch, the 6 of us, the 5 others that I talked to now, we hadn't even seen it before. I had just driven by it on the road. And we went up there to stay for the weekend. And we saw a really exciting time. We had a cottage cheese dish full of keys that opened strange doors and equipment that we had no idea what it did, and it was all kind of exciting and new. But the first morning after we woke up and we had the coffee going on a wood stove, and I looked out and saw a person hanging around the front gate. And so I went out and I said, I think that might be my neighbor, Indigenous, that I heard my uncle talk about. So I went out and I said to him, are you Indigenous? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm Paul. I think you know my Uncle Bill. We're having a cup of coffee. I'm your new neighbor. Come on down and join us. So he did. and he sat down at the table, and first thing he wondered if someone had a cigarette, which somebody did. I offered him one, a Pall Mall straight, he turned it down. Someone offered a Peter Jackson with a filter tip, and that pleased him. So sitting and smoking our cigarettes and having a cup of coffee, and our first neighborly visit, he suddenly pounded his fist on the table, and he said, "This is my table." And we all, beg pardon? And this is my table, this is my house. I tell you, get out, you get out. Must be some mistake in this. The fence there is right on the line. The Queen's coat of arms, not Queen. Nothing, black stump and big tree. That's where the land is. I tell you, get out, you get out. So the friendly coffee thing ended fairly shortly after that. And he said he was going to town, and was anybody going to town, give him a lift. And I said, well, I'll give you a lift. Maybe we can sort things out and find out what's happening here. So anyway, he didn't say anything on the way into Ashcroft, and neither did I. But that was our welcome to the valley. And about 3 weeks later, Lynn and I arrived about 10 o'clock at night, driven up from Vancouver with our 2 young kids, and pulled up in front of the cabin, and there was I said, "What's that?" A great big sign on the door, nailed on the door, saying, "Warning, this is an Indian reservation. Anyone found trespassing on an Indian reservation is liable to a fine of $100 or imprisonment or both. Welcome to the valley." That was my first initiation. What happened, we tore the sign off and went into town and spoke to the Indian agent. They sent a survey crew up from Ottawa, from the then Department of Indian Affairs, to survey 300 feet of fence that separated our property from the reserve. Proved that it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Went and advised Indigenous so much, and that was the end of that dispute, or so we thought. I'd now like to turn to the second part, and that is Jody Wilson-Raybould, and she has written a book,
Yep.
which is called From Where I Stand, and I'm going to exactly read these excerpts because I don't want there to be any confusion about their being misinterpreted. There are 3 items here. Indigenous rights are inherent, a result of the fact that Indigenous people owned and governed the lands and resources that now make up Canada prior to the arrival of Europeans. And the second item. The land belongs not only to people presently living, but also to past and future generations who are considered to be as much a part of the tribal entity as the present generation. At the end of the day, any land management initiative that we advocate or support as First Nations leaders should have as its ultimate objective the improvement of the quality of life of our people with practicing and thriving cultures. Anything less, our people will no doubt reject. Third item. First Nations are in a period of transition. We are building, rebuilding our nations. We are seeking fair access to land and resources beyond our small reserves. We are looking to share in both the decision-making with respect to our traditional lands and to benefit from those lands where we agree with the proposed land use. That's in the paper today, I think. As well as to govern our existing reserve lands or settlement lands. Here, I would like to focus on the management of our existing reserves or settlement lands and our success at moving away from governments under the Indian Act. We are asking ourselves some very fundamental questions. How is our land to be held? How are interests in land created? Who can hold interests in land? How are we going to govern and administer our lands? And we're did this all start? I'll read it one more item. And I won't read the rest of this. This is item 4. In Canada, the relationship with the settler government was somewhat different by the time the British arrived. The Crown, rather than simply dismissing our presence out of hand through theological and other arguments, recognized our existence and required that before its subjects could settle our land, the lands would need to be acquired lawfully from us by an official representative of the Crown. Through the process of treaty making, lands were identified as ours based upon the historical occupation of our people's traditional territories, with the balance of the lands, that's all the lands that aren't classified as what would become reserves. The balance of the lands would have inherent rights attached to them, the right to hunt, fish, and so on. It's the so on, I think that's the sticky point at this point in time. I am, of course, talking about the process of treaty making. Her two biggest issues are, one, getting rid of the Indian Act, which in essence makes all Indians living on reserves wards of the federal government. And she's seeking self-government to replace the Indian Act. What is self-government? Under her term, self-government was each nation would have sole jurisdiction and autonomy from other nations with jurisdictions over their areas. Some of those activities would be currently covered under federal legislation, some under provincial legislation, and some under municipal legislation. I just asked a question at this point. How many Indian reservations or indigenous reservations do you think there are in British Columbia? Anybody got a guess?
110. 110.
632. I thought the same thing. I found this out when I phoned the land office of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs to find out when the registration of my neighbor had gone into effect. And I referred to the fact that I thought there were some 600 reservations across Canada. And they said, oh, no, there are 1,600 in British Columbia alone. 1,600 reservations in British Columbia. There are, of those 1,600, there are 203 what referred to as nations that I guess collectively get together and form a nation. And it's those nations that she is looking to develop self-government. Now that self-government, and she says, we are not opposed to paying taxes, just taxes to the wrong government. Some questions that come to mind. Going back to 1763, when the original deal was made, there were approximately 140,000, I believe, the records are pretty sketchy back then, Indigenous people in Canada, and about 800,000 of emerging European people in Canada, so under 1 million in all of Canada. If they own, the Indigenous people own all of what is now Canada, that would amount to about 14,500 acres per person at that time. And I can leave it to your imagination to find out how self-government of some 630 individual autonomous nations across Canada superimposed on the existing federal, provincial, and municipal governments would actually work. How would it work with regard to trade, or how would it work with respect to defense and so on. And I'm thinking that at the time, that in good faith, I'm assuming in 1763, when the original treaty was, it was broken into two parts. One, the reservation system, and all other. And they had exclusive rights in the agreement to the reservations, and then access to all of the rest of Canada that was not part of the reservation system. And I had asked if that was the part, I asked this at the department when I met with the Department of Indigenous Affairs, if that was the part that my neighbor was leaning on to give him access to our ranch. That's like the all other, in addition to the reserves. And he said, yes, that's what would be. So at the time, the phone or the camera was not invented until 1860, about 100 years after that meeting. And the phone was invented in 1876. And I'm wondering if the people sitting around making that agreement, all in good faith, I'm sure, in 1763, could have imagined the kind of country that Canada is now, where not only are there phones, but you can take a picture with a phone. And that's a whole different world. I want to also mention that I had a paper route when I was a teenager, and a lot of people may think, well, what's that got to do with anything? But a lot of people think that the newspaper paid the carriers in order to deliver the papers. That's not the case. The newspaper sold the papers to the carrier who had a route, and it was up to them to collect the money to pay for the papers. So it was an entrepreneurial exercise that a lot of young people, how many people in this room had a paper route? And you learn a lot about people when you're standing in front every 2 weeks collecting from them, some really good and some really rotten people up there. So I remember exactly the bill that I got for 2 weeks worth of papers for one customer was 47 2/5 cents. And I would bill the customer 60 cents, so I made a little over a cent per paper delivered. And I just wanted to mention that when there are no longer any paper routes, really, the way we knew them, the paper routes are gone. The Winnipeg Tribune that I delivered is gone. All of the jobs in Lake of the Woods, cutting trees to make pulp sticks and putting booms over the winter months in Lake of the Woods and then towed to the mill in the spring to make newsprint, are gone. And it seems to me that the past is gone. There's nothing I can do or anybody can do to bring back paper routes or the paper or a lot of the other things. We've got a different world. And the next item I want to cover, I've got listed here, is now for something completely different. You got that slide up? Oh, this, by the way, is the location of the reserves in British Columbia. That's a map you can get from the thing. And we're right in there up toward we're in that bottom section there that is blown up elsewhere. But there are 203 of those in British Columbia. In any event, maybe we can have the next slide. The last time I spoke to Rotary was in November of 1972. And the result of that was a full-page story in the province newspaper, where they had requests for reprints for over 1,000 reprints from Australia through to McMaster University, dealing with a speech I gave on hippies. Hippies was a new group. How many people here can remember the hippies? It actually has quite a bit to do because it had everything to do with my ranch again. And how did I get into the hippie thing? I put an ad in the paper to rent the whole ranch for $200 a month. And I got a reply from a young couple just graduated from Carleton in land use, and they wanted to rent it for experimental crop growing, and I thought, man, brand new people coming, so I rented it to them. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, I arrived to find out that they had a lot of friends. Our whole front yard was full of minivans and cars and trucks, all painted with flowers, all on them, and wearing clothes totally optional. And they had really a stunning revelation. My first reaction was that I've been had, and I'm going to throw them off. And then I stopped, and I thought maybe it's just my old conservative nature to take this. Maybe the kids are okay, maybe I will go along with this. And so I did. It proved over the next 3 years that my first instinct was the correct one. There were over 4,000 hippies on the ranch over a 3-year period. The largest hippie commune in Canada. They had bus tours. They had people talking out the window about young runaway girls working in the garden with no clothes on. And in trying to discuss with them what caused you people, what's happened to our society for this, and the answer from all was basically the same. God doesn't charge for the land, and you have used your power and your rules to make the rules to put up fences and keep us out. That makes you evil. And we should be able to live and do, everybody should be able to live and do exactly what they want, where they want to do it, and that's all. And I said, well, what if nobody wanted to dig salt? I said, then we would live without salt. And over the next a couple of years, it raised the question of, and I thought, first I thought that was a kind of a stupid answer, and then I thought, wait a minute, that's not really a stupid answer at all. You know, God did not charge for the land, and yet most of the disputes that are going on are over a little 3-letter word called own, O-W-N. How do you get from God providing the land for nothing to each of you or anybody owning land? That's a question that deserves more than a passing. And you look at what have other countries done to deal with this issue? They haven't dealt with it very well either. In most cases, ownership of land has changed because there's been a war. And I don't think anybody wants to look at that kind of a solution in Canada. And not only that, but wars don't work either. There was a 6-day war between the Palestinians and the Israelis, I think in 1967, about 50 years ago, and they're still, in essence, at war, as far as I can see. And so, what constitutes ownership? How is that organized and arranged? And this and ownership not only, according to Jody, by people who are living now, but people who died 200 years ago also, in her view, own part of my ranch by virtue of the all others that my ranch fell into. I'd now like to move to how are we doing for time? Okay. Another part of that, there was a book by Calvin Helene totally different approach. Both, and I'd like to just tell you, first met Calvin Helene as a speaker of the Provost Club. And his approach was so different that I went up to him afterwards and shook his hand. And he basically said that he was from a reserve up near Prince George. And I'll read you who he is first and then get into some of his answers. Author Calvin Helene worked his way up from an impoverished boyhood in a remote Native American village to become a successful attorney. Actually worked with Gordon Esau in his firm, just 100 feet from this building. And he was dedicated his life to help make others break the bonds of economic dependency and emerge with newfound confidence and self-worth. Now in his new book, The Economic Dependency Trap, Breaking Free to Self-Reliance, Helene reveals the hidden puppet strings attached to handouts on every level, from households to the global economy. He proposes groundbreaking positive solutions in down-to-earth language any reader can understand. And in talking to him at the Provost Club, he said that he went back to his nation, reserve area, was in the Prince George area, and he said it had been there for 5,000 or 6,000 years. And all of a sudden, there's the youth, they've got a horrific suicide rate, they're sniffing glue and gas, they're not having, and the whole thing is disintegrating. And what could possibly have happened to change something that had existed for 5,000 or 6,000 years, where the men went out and hunted and caught the fish, and the women raised the kids and did the cooking and made the clothes, and the kids went out and got the firewood, and there was just everybody was doing something to contribute to the well-being of that group. And he said that it came down to what's happened to make that change. He said it's one word, and that word is free, and making things free. And that's why he's got right on the front book, right where you put the cheese on the trap with the money underneath it, is the word free. So I think that one of the things that might be looked at, he has taken such a high road in a totally different direction. And Jody, in her book, basically is spending her day trying to nail down and confirm all of the rights and so on of the people as she moved from now to the past. Helene is looking from now into the future and what can be done to make things better. And one of the things that thought to me with the government and if I can just find the federal government budget was tabled in the House of Commons on March 10th, 2019. It includes 24 measures for Indigenous peoples, totaling approximately $4.7 billion. More than $4.4 billion has been identified for First Nations. That's free money from Helene's point of view. And investments over the last 4 budgets, the federal budgets, total more than $21 billion. 4 times the amount that was agreed on in the Kelowna Accord, which is supposed to put all the unrest to rest. One of the things that I'm thinking that they might work into a budget would be to sit down with Calvin Helene and create some documentaries of what are some of the success stories of the Native peoples that have been so successful. They're not all impoverished. West Bank, Tawasin, there are a lot that have, and yet they're in so many problems with so many others. And if there were a series of documentaries where the people in the thing in the reservations could see some practicality about what their own people had done in their own situation to create their own success and not rely on government handouts or being made to feel wards of the state. And to me, that would be one positive thing that could come out of it. And to get to the wrap up, one of the things that when I was a director on the Rotary Club that I was listening to someone putting forth something about putting more wells in the Congo and so on in Africa to provide clean water. I'd seen on the news the night before where there's a reservation in James Bay that's been on a boil water for 30 years. And I'm thinking, we've got 40%, I think, of all of the fresh water in the world. And people are living in boiling their water for 30 years. And so I said, why don't we look at, instead of maybe taking one well less in Africa and doing something to solve our own situation in our own backyard. So I took it upon myself through the board to explore that. And I wrote a letter to the person in the Tawasin to get a contact in the James Bay area. I never got a reply. And I'd indicated that Rotary were looking at possibly doing this as a project, which I thought would be a, pardon me, a high profile thing for Rotary to do, to be able to demonstrate to the world that Rotary could fix something in 6 weeks that the government has fumbled around with for 30 years. And, in any event, I didn't get a reply for a contact. I worked with Fred West on this, and he had an engineer in Winnipeg that we had, who was also a Rotarian, to put together a group of Rotary groups that could deal with the water issue. And in any event, he gave me the name of a guy by the name of Rod Kinnu. You may have recognized that name. He's an Indigenous person in the Manitoba legislature. I could meet with him. He's closer to James Bay than to Wasson, and maybe get to, and indicated what we wanted to do to try and solve the water problem. He didn't reply either. So at the end, Fred West and I felt, this is kind of, I can't even get answers of how we start the program, and we sort of felt a little bit like a Boy Scout trying to take an old lady across the road that didn't want to go. Anyway, there are dozens, and according to can we have that slide that shows you why I'm kind of glad we didn't take this on, because my idea of a water treatment thing was to pound a pipe in the ground with a tap on the top that kids could get water out of by the bucket. That is on a reserve in Ontario, and that's the water purification system. They had trouble with people learning how to run it. I can't understand that. That's just, so when I saw that picture, I thought, am I glad? That's one Rotary project that I think I'm happy that we sidestepped. But anyway, but the boil water thing, the poor housing was another thing was a problem with the reservation. And when at the ranch, one day I was driving by Indigenous, our original greet and meet guy. He lived in a little log cabin right beside the road that had a sod roof on it and a stovepipe. And I went by one time in the summer and I said, a great big Caterpillar tractor and a whole pile of lumber in his front yard. And I said, stopped and went in. I said, Indigenous, what's this about? He said, the government are building me a house. Really? I said, as soon as you're going to come up here anyway, and we need a house, why don't you tell them to drop one off in our yard too? So he just laughed. But later on, in the fall, the house got built in the summer. It was a beautiful house with a dugout basement with garage doors and concrete steps and pink inside the windows and looked beautiful. But I was up there hunting in the fall, and there's snow sweeping across the front steps of the new house. the smoke still coming out of the chimney of his cabin. So I went and knocked on the door and I said, Indigenous, and he said, how come you're not living in your new house? I don't like it. Why don't you like it? Well, he said, in the morning when I'm in my cabin here and I get out of bed, I put my feet on the floor, there's nice warm boards. And he said, that house there has got rubber tile, cold on your feet, not pleasant. And he said, also they heat it with oil. I heat mine with burning wood. Don't like the smell of oil, like the smell of burning wood. Also, they put a big door on the side of the house so that I could store a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't have room to store before in the house. But he said the problem is it faces the wind, and the wind blows right through one of the doors into the whole house, and the whole house is cold and damp and drafty all the time. I just don't like it. And I said, didn't anybody talk to you about this when they were putting it up? No. There's a part of the problem, and somebody, non-Indigenous, decided for him what was best for him, without asking him, or making him a part of the decision. And I think that if you multiply that, when I say that our little ranch and our little situation is kind of a microcosm of what's happening all across Canada. And with result, I'm no psychiatrist, but in looking at there were 7 people in, I think it was Thunder Bay Reserve, that committed suicide, one as young as 10. And what would cause that? Humongous, 3 times the rate of non-Indigenous people. And that is, I think it may have something to do with the fact that the youth are caught on a reserve, made to feel dependent on the government, being dragged into the past by all the traditions and the important things that are a part of that culture, but the world changing so rapidly out in front of them with no bridge from that point to hook them on to the future. And I think that is probably one of the biggest problems. And I think that one of the things that we've got to quit wasting time on is trying to reclaim the past and to the exclusion of the new world that we all live in. And I've run out of time, I spoke too long. One idea I'll leave you with, and maybe you could just put this on, Brian. What if we were to, for example, create a new company in Canada, which is called Indigex, Indig meaning for Indigenous, and EX meaning exit, the land or the Indian Act, and making all reserves owned by this new super company, if you like, so that they would still be totally Indigenous owned. There'd be 15 board of directors on it that ran it, each one representing the various regions in Canada. One held for the federal government to just sit in as an observer at what's going on, but not anymore making them feel like they're wards on their own land. And with what could be created almost overnight would be the largest real estate development company with incredible borrowing powers that could launch into an incredible number